My name is Errol. Well, hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. My name is not Errol, my name is Guy, and today we're going to be looking at bonds and flaws. Now, bonds and flaws came from Dungeons and Dragons, and there are many other role-playing systems out there that give your character vices, backstories, dependencies, addictions, and the like. They exist because they add flavour to our characters, and they're there to help us roleplay better than if we didn't have them, for example. Now, Errol is an extreme case where I would probably not allow the player to play that character if they are playing with a bunch of people who follow the law, really, because Errol wanting to sacrifice everyone to our dark god Cthulhu is going to really disrupt the flow of the game. So that's too extreme. And you have to be aware that sometimes you can make these things that are too extreme. Another thing also to bear in mind before we start this video is that, or before we start unpacking anyway, is that you need to be sensitive to flaws and vices and the like, because some people have addictions in real life. And I think I think a lot of people do. I know I certainly have my little things that I turn to. No, it's not smoking or drugs or anything like that. No. I wish it was something as simple as that. No, it's just drinking copious amounts of milk. Anyway, that's a whole different story, and one that we don't necessarily need to go into now. Overshare, yes, okay. Moving swiftly along, nonetheless, people do have bonds and vices in real life, and you need to be aware that before you start making fun of these things, that you should treat them as well and as respectfully as you can, rather than for comedic relief. Focus on the role-playing aspects of it rather than on the entertainment value of it. It brings entertainment through exploration. I know that sounds macabre and it sounds quite dark, but it really does. So what are our bonds and flaws? Well, we've got bonds, we've got flaws, and we've got more. How are we going to unpack these? Now, if your system doesn't have a bonds and flaws or vices or dependencies or addictions system, there is nothing stopping you from going to your GM and asking if you can include this anyway. All it's doing is creating a more rounded character. So let's have a look. So bonds. What are bonds? Bonds in this particular sense refer to things that tie you back to your history, to your past. It could be that you are trying to pay off your student loan, as in most of America, according to the news. It could be that you have sworn an oath in your youth to uphold something or to do something. Perhaps it's a religious decision. Whatever it is that the bond links you to your character's past. This is a very, very powerful way of having a good character backstory and having the ability to explore it. A GM should take your bond and look at it and go, aha, you have decided that you have sworn to pay for your ailing mother for the rest of your life, and every month you try and send 500,000 credits back home so she can maintain her lifestyle of opulence and fine dining. When you fail to do that, there is no mechanical requirement or result because you failed to do it. It is purely narrative. From your perspective as the player, it allows you to sit back and roleplay that your character is now lamenting that they were unable to fulfill their duty. They couldn't send this money back, so they might be more desperate. They might go and engage with your fellow PCs. Do you think I could borrow 500,000 credits? It's rather important. You see, I didn't send it back to Mummy, and she needs it for her medication. If she doesn't have her gin and tonic at 6 p.m. every day, she goes mental. And it's an imported gin made by a very specific individual, and he charges the earth for it because he knows she's his only customer. But I need to give it to her because it's important. That's certainly going to help your role-playing space. You now have this reliance on your fellow PCs. They're invested in your character because your character's taken a lot of cash from them or has asked them for a favor. Please come with me to the prison so I can go and see my father or my sister or my son. All of those things, all of these bonds allow us, as we unpack them, they allow us to realize that our stories can be so much richer, so much more powerful by adding these things in. Are they something that can never be resolved? They should be resolved. And that should be part of your plan, part of your journey. So when you're introducing your character, when you're talking about your character's motivations, this is where you can lean heavily on the bond and say, well, this is my character that I would like to explore. Part of that character is that they have a bond. There is a prison warden who helped them escape from prison 10 years ago. They were convicted rightly of some petty crimes and things. They handled it poorly because they were young, but this warden saw more. And so the warden is now expecting every month a report back from me, a simple little report back. But I need to send it. And if I don't send it, then I need to do everything in my power to send it. That's a very elegant a bond, I should say. A very elegant bond because it does prove a whole lot of things about the PC. The PC is good to their word. They are reliable. They try to do the right thing. Yes, they have done the wrong thing in the past and could possibly do the wrong thing in the future. Once you have erred, it is easier to err again, so they say. But I don't know about that, but it gives us a lot of character information from a simple single sentence and just by adding a single bond. So it adds to our character's drive, it adds to the conversation that we can have just before we start the game, it adds to the conversations that we will have in-game. Hopefully the game master will then take that bond and will develop it and flesh it out to what if the warden now responds saying, I need your help, or you're in danger, remember Eric, who was in the cell with you, he's been released and he wants blood because he feels that you were released early, whatever. Hopefully the GM will take that. You are not prevented from reminding the GM about your bond. Don't go up to the GM and say, hey, listen, I got this character bond and you should really do it because it's very interesting and everyone's going to absolutely love it, that I have to go to my snail farm and I have to restock it with algae. You can have an adventure where the algae doesn't grow properly. Ooh. Don't do that. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Simply go to your GM and say, I have these bonds. I don't know if you want to just have a look at them. If you want, I've got one bond. Have a look at it. Just putting it out there, reminding you. I know that you've been stressed out recently. You know, you've been running adventures. They're great. They're brilliant. You're wonderful. Marvelous. But just NPC, written them up, all the stats. There we go. Don't do that. Do not write up the stats for the NPCs. That's the GM's job. Unless he asks you to, or unless she asks you to, or unless they ask you to, do not do that. Simply let them know that it's there. Remind them. I know my players, I just sometimes forget about flaws and bonds. And when they remind me, I go, oh, yes, there we go. Now I've remembered that all along. Yeah. No, I haven't forgotten about it. Don't you? Oh, yes, you watch and see what happens next week. Because now I know what adventure I'm running next week. Nonetheless. Okay, so that's bonds. Flaws are a different story. So bonds can be resolved. Your aunt can die, your dog can now learn how to read and write and start a successful career as a publisher, whatever. You can overcome your bonds throughout the course of your journey and throughout the course of your character's adventures. Flaws should take longer to overcome. These are inherent issues, inherent things that your character has that your character maybe not even be aware of, or they are aware of it, but they have no idea how to get rid of it. So the history, how did the flaw come about? Why is this important for you? It just adds to your backstory. Why does this character have a debilitating fear of snakes? I grew up in a country where snakes were in those days fairly common. The area we lived in was sometimes referred to as the snake belt because it was lush, warm, tropical environment and there were snakes everywhere. I've never been bitten by a snake. I've never seen someone bitten by a snake. I have seen many snakes killed by humans, but that's about it. And yet, I have an absolute phobia of snakes. What is it called? Hasper, something along those lines. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't care what it's called. I know what it is. I hate them. And they are out to get me. It's not paranoia. So where does it come from? Well, childhood experiences or just watching the wrong kinds of films on television, or there's a history to it and it allows you to then explore it. Indiana Jones has a fear of snakes as well. We don't necessarily know where they come from, but he certainly has them, and that creates a moment of humor in the entire situation, but also it allows him to face that creature, or the creatures I should say, in a small way. So where does it come from? How do you then incorporate it? If your character has the flaw that they have to write everything down, or that they are addicted to something, or that they like to correct people, what do they do about that? Do they try and stop themselves? Are they even aware of it? How can you incorporate it into your character? And how can you then adapt the character, so that they then reveal what you have now incorporated? So a character who is addicted to smoking, for example, that is a flaw. The flaw is fairly inconsequential whilst they have cigarettes. The moment they run out of cigarettes, however, that's when then you need to come in and say, well, how is my character going to adapt to the situation? They're going to get grumpy, they're going to get grouchy, they're going to try and maybe use other things that they can set on fire and try and inhale. I know that certainly happened to people that I know that are smokers and are desperate to fill their lungs up with something. There is that option. Are they going to try and switch to something else? Are you going to run them if they have the flaw of eating a lot? If they are, and they eat when they're depressed, and they get depressed because they eat, so they eat more, or they eat when they get bored, which is certainly what I do, you go, oh, well, just stop it. Yeah, well, you can't, because it's how you stop the situation in the first place, which causes the situation in the second. Anyway, how is the character going to deal with it? Are they going to make light of the situation? Are they going to talk about it on the YouTube channel? How are they going to do it? What are they going to do? So all of these questions start to inform how your character is going to operate in times of crises. Generally, in times of plenty, where the character has access to everything that they could possibly want, then, without a doubt, that isn't going to necessarily reflect itself. So all that you're getting out of just adding in a couple flaws, one flaw, you don't need to have multiple. Well, yeah, we are all flawed, absolutely, but you don't have to have hundreds of the flaws. Make sure that the flaw that you are also adding in is not going to be too disruptive to the group. So the flaw of having to kill someone every single time you encounter them because you want to sacrifice them to your dark god, that's a psychological flaw that is going to cause the group to grind to a halt. If your character wants to kill and eat everybody they come across, that is not going to work for a party unless you are playing a party of psychopaths and you're trying to recreate American Horror Story. That's fine. But if your flaw is going to be so disruptive that it's going to prevent the other player characters from doing what they want to do and from going on the adventure, avoid it. Chuck it out. Don't bring it anywhere near the table. That's my advice to you on flaws. Now, when we look at more, what is the more that we talk about? Well, we talk about the adventure. We have spoken about that a little bit already in terms of taking it to your GM and offering it to GM. Your GM is not the only source of adventures. You are. And there's nothing stopping you from having your character one day sitting around the campfire whilst everyone is sharpening their axes and relearning their spells to say, fellas, I've got a bit of a problem and I think you might be able to help me, actually. I've got this aunt who has a real gin problem. Would you mind if we journeyed to her town? It's not far from here, as a matter of fact. And just went and had a word with the old bint. Maybe get her sober so I can stop paying all of her gin fees. It creates an adventure on the fly. Your GM hopefully will roll with it and will create the fact that your aunt is a multi-headed monster who's terrorizing the town and is using the gin to, I don't know, inter bats into glass jars or something, and pick a thing. Nonetheless, hopefully your GM will roll with it, and you've now created a story, an adventure that your characters go on. Once the aunt is dealt with, then theoretically your bond is dealt with. But you could then have the flaw of having had to dispatch your own aunt, and that starts to become grief or depression, for example. Again, handle it with tact and with care and explore it as it should be explored in terms of telling a story, not in terms of making fun or mocking individuals who have those conditions. Now, that can help with character growth once the character has discovered that they have a flaw. Perhaps the flaw is that they finish somebody else's sentences. Perhaps the flaw is that they ramble when they talk too much. How are they going to grow from that? I know that when I use the same word repeatedly, such as my catchphrases, so, anyway, things like that, I try and ask my friends to point it out when I use those words. It can be irritating for me because I realize how often I use them, but it does also allow me the opportunity to grow and change and adapt as I learn not to use those safe words that I fall back on when I don't have anything to say or when I want to change topic, for example. It also allows us to help each other. If you have a PC whose flaw doesn't get in the way very much, who doesn't necessarily even have a flaw or a bond, you have a PC, however, who does in your party, there is nothing stopping you as the player character of the other character from going and saying, I've noticed that your aunt takes a lot of your money. Is there any way that we can maybe help her get a job, for example? I mean, what's the deal? Nothing stops you from engaging with your fellow player characters and finding out what their bonds and flaws are. As a matter of fact, it just makes for better role-playing. It makes for more interesting stories, and it shows that you are invested not only in your own character, but in everybody else's character. And that positions you as being a great player. You are supporting everybody at the table. You're supporting the GM and you're supporting your fellow players. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, that is at the very essence of bonds and flaws, is helping out your fellow player characters overcome theirs. It creates interesting adventure. It creates growth within the party. It creates inter-party relationships. It does all kinds of wonderful things, and all simply from just having a bond or a flaw. Well, those are my thoughts on bonds and flaws. What are your thoughts on bonds and flaws? Do you incorporate them? Do you find them a burden? Do they not interest you in the slightest? Do you not have any of your own? Perhaps you have too many and you don't want to share. All kinds of things come up when we talk bonds and flaws. Hopefully I've inspired you to maybe add one or two to your character, regardless of the system that you're playing, simply because there's so much fun to play. Until next time, I wish you and yours the very happiest of playing. Well, I like the mantra of Cthulhu in terms of bringing about world end and chaos and destruction, because I don't subscribe to the idea that we are the most superior species on the planet. I don't think that at all. I have heard the bells ringing, the Goblin Bells in the tower. I've heard them ringing, and I know what's coming up because, well, that's what they do, is they alert you to when things happen. And so, you know, Cthulhu, our Lord and Saviour, will come through for us and obliterate the whole planet. And then we can start again with crabs.